The moment the monitor went silent, I knew someone had just decided who lives and who doesn't. The sharp antiseptic smell still hung in the air as I stood frozen beside my father's bed, staring at a screen that had been alive just seconds ago. The steady green line that used to pulse with each heartbeat had flattened into a quiet, indifferent glow. No alarm, no warning, just silence. The hum of machines that once filled the room had vanished, replaced by a heavy stillness that pressed against my chest. My fingers tightened around the metal rail of the hospital-grade bed we'd installed in the living room, the cold steel biting into my skin as if it was the only thing still grounded in reality. The oxygen concentrator sat dead in the corner, its software gone. The backup battery unit beneath the monitor blinked a weak amber light, counting down minutes we didn't have. I could hear my father breathing, shallow and uneven, each inhale thinner than the last, like the room itself was running out of air. Just 12 hours earlier, this house had felt like a controlled ICU environment, every cable secured, every system tested twice. I built it that way. Every wire, every breaker, every contingency planned. Or at least, I thought I had. The faint smell of heated plastic drifted from the power strip, a reminder that something had failed or been forced to fail. My pulse pounded in my ears as I turned toward the window. Outside, the streetlights were still on. The houses across the cul-de-sac glowed warm and steady, televisions flickering behind curtains, porch lights casting soft yellow pools onto trimmed lawns. The power wasn't out. Not here. Not anywhere else. Just my house. Just this room. The realization landed slow and heavy, like a weight settling into my gut. This wasn't an outage. It was a decision. I moved fast, grabbing my phone, already dialing the utility company before the first ring even registered in my head. My voice came out sharper than I expected, cutting through the automated prompts until I forced a human on the line. They hesitated when I gave the address. I heard papers shuffle, keys tapping, a pause that stretched just long enough to mean something was wrong. Then the words came, careful and rehearsed. Sir, the service interruption was requested under HOA authority due to a compliance issue. Compliance. The word tasted bitter, like it didn't belong anywhere near a room designed to keep someone alive. I turned back toward my father, watching the weak rise and fall of his chest, the dim light reflecting off the still screen. And that's when I saw her, standing just beyond my front gate, perfectly still under the glow of a decorative street lamp, clipboard tucked neatly against her side like she was inspecting a garden instead of shutting down a life. Rebecca Holloway, HOA president. Her posture was relaxed, almost satisfied, like everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. The night air carried the faint scent of her perfume even through the cracked window, something floral and expensive that didn't quite mask the cold precision behind her expression. She glanced up, met my eyes, and gave a small, polite nod. Like this was routine. Like this was allowed. My grip on the phone tightened as the battery unit behind me let out a soft, warning beep. 1 minute gone. More slipping away. And in that moment, standing between silence and whatever came next, I realized something she clearly didn't. She thought she had turned off the power. She had no idea what system she had just touched. I stepped away from the window and back into the room, the air feeling thinner with every second, like the house itself was holding its breath. The backup unit gave another soft chirp, not loud enough to panic anyone else, but loud enough for me to feel it in my spine. 30 seconds gone. Maybe less. I moved to the control panel mounted beside the breaker box, flipping open the metal cover with a sharp clang that echoed louder than it should have. Every switch was exactly where I left it. No tripped breakers. No surge marks. No signs of failure. This was clean. Too clean. I pressed my palm against the panel, feeling nothing but cold metal, no vibration, no current. Whoever cut the power did not just shut it off. They isolated it. Precision like that does not happen by accident. Behind me, my father's breathing shifted again, a shallow inhale followed by a pause that stretched just a little too long. I turned back, counting silently, 1, 2, 3, until the next breath came. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic wipes, and something warmer now, the kind of heat that builds when systems stop moving air. I grabbed the manual resuscitation bag from the side table and checked the valve, my hand steady even as my pulse refused to slow down. This was not panic. This was timing. I moved back to my phone. The call with the utility company still connected, their voice asking if I wanted to file a complaint, if I wanted to schedule a technician, options that lived in hours when I only had minutes. Cancel the request, I said, keeping my voice level. You cannot authorize a shutoff on a medically dependent residence. Another pause. More typing. Then the answer I already knew was coming. Sir, the request was validated through your homeowners association. It meets current compliance standards. Standards. I looked around the room at the equipment that had been inspected, permitted, documented. Every wire tagged. Every outlet approved. This setup had passed more checks than most small clinics. And yet, one signature on the wrong piece of paper had just undone all of it. I ended the call without another word and set the phone down for exactly 1 second, long enough to steady my thoughts. Then I picked up the other phone. Not the one with apps and contacts and notifications. The one that stayed in the drawer, black case, no distractions. I slid it open and dialed a number from memory, each digit landing with quiet certainty. It rang once, then silence. Not a disconnect, not a voicemail, just a line that had been answered without a sound. Carter, I said, my voice low, controlled. Residential node offline. Medical dependency active. Unauthorized external override. I listened for half a second, then added, yes. Confirm isolation. Immediate response required. I closed the phone and slipped it back into the drawer like it had never been there. Outside, Rebecca shifted her weight, glancing down at her clipboard as if checking off a completed task. The street remained calm, almost peaceful, the kind of quiet neighborhood she thought she controlled. Another soft beep came from behind me. Less time now. I walked back to the bed and adjusted the oxygen line manually, watching my father's chest rise again, forcing the rhythm to hold. Stay with me, I said under my breath, more to the room than to him. And then, somewhere in the distance, I heard it. Low at first, a deep, steady rumble that did not belong to any car on this street. Not a passing truck, not a neighbor leaving early. This was heavier, deliberate, the kind of sound that carries through pavement and into your bones before you even see it. I glanced back toward the window as the faint vibration reached the glass. Rebecca looked up too, her expression tightening just slightly, like something had entered her perfectly ordered system without permission. And for the first time since the lights went out, the silence in the room did not feel empty anymore. It felt like something was on its way. The rumble grew louder, rolling through the pavement like distant thunder, steady and controlled, not rushed, not chaotic, the kind of sound that belongs to something that knows exactly where it is going. I stepped closer to the window, the glass cool against my fingertips, and watched as the first set of headlights turned onto our street, bright and deliberate, cutting through the quiet like a line being drawn. Rebecca took a step back from the curb, her posture shifting, clipboard lowering just a few inches as the vehicle came into full view. It was not a pickup truck, not a utility van. It was a heavy-duty generator unit mounted on a flatbed, matte gray, industrial, the kind used for critical infrastructure, not residential fixes. The diesel engine idled low and powerful, vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. Another truck followed behind it, then a third, each one moving in formation, slow and precise, filling the narrow suburban street with something that did not belong in her version of order. The soft yellow glow from the streetlights flickered for a split second as the first truck came to a stop directly in front of my house. Doors opened in sync, and 3 men stepped out, wearing dark jackets with no logos, no names, just clean lines and purpose in every movement. They did not look around like contractors trying to figure things out. They moved like they already knew the layout. One of them glanced up at the power lines, then toward my house, then nodded once. No wasted motion. No questions. Rebecca stepped forward, her voice carrying through the still night, controlled but sharper now. Excuse me, you cannot park that equipment here without HOA authorization. The words sounded smaller than she expected, like they did not carry the same weight anymore. The man closest to her did not raise his voice. He did not even look at her right away. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded document, and handed it to her with a calm, practiced motion. Federal emergency override, he said, each word clear and even. Step back from the work zone, ma'am. I watched her face as she took the paper, her eyes scanning lines that did not match anything she had prepared for. The confidence in her posture tightened, then cracked just slightly at the edges. The second truck's engine revved softly as cables were uncoiled, thick, reinforced lines laid across the asphalt with careful precision. The smell of diesel mixed with cool night air drifted through the window, sharp and grounding. Inside, the backup unit behind me let out another warning tone, weaker now, stretched thin. I turned back to my father, adjusting the line again, keeping his breathing steady, counting each rise and fall. Just a little longer, I said quietly, more certain now than I had been minutes ago. Outside, the lead technician signaled with a simple hand motion, and the first connection snapped into place with a solid, metallic click that echoed down the street. The sound carried weight, like a switch being thrown somewhere far beyond this neighborhood. The truck's engine deepened, the vibration shifting from idle to active load. The lights across the street flickered again, but this time they held. Then, a fraction of a second later, the room behind me came alive. A low hum returned, steady and familiar, like a heartbeat restarting. The monitor screen glowed back to life, lines drawing themselves across the black, one pulse, then another, each one stronger than the last. Air moved again through the system, the oxygen concentrator breathing with quiet consistency. I exhaled without realizing I had been holding it. Outside, Rebecca lowered the paper slowly, her eyes fixed on the trucks now lining her perfectly managed street, her expression no longer controlled, no longer certain. For the first time since she made that decision, she was not the one in charge of what happened next. The sound of the machines returning was not loud, but it filled the room in a way silence never could, a steady hum layered with soft mechanical breaths and the rhythmic pulse of the monitor, rebuilding its pattern one line at a time. I stood there for a second, letting the system stabilize, watching the numbers climb back into safe ranges, watching color return where there had been nothing but dim light and waiting. My father's breathing evened out, still fragile, but no longer fading. Each inhale supported, each exhale steady enough to hold. The tension in my chest did not disappear, but it shifted, no longer sharp and urgent, more like pressure settling into something controlled. Outside, the diesel engines continued their low, constant vibration, not disruptive, just present, like a reminder that something larger had stepped into a space that was never meant to handle it. I walked back toward the window, slower this time, my movements measured, precise, the way they always were when systems mattered. Rebecca had not moved far. She stood a few feet back from the trucks now, the paper still in her hand, her posture no longer rigid, no longer certain. The man she had spoken to earlier was already working again, giving quiet instructions to the others, pointing toward the line connection, checking a handheld device that reflected faint blue light against his face. No one asked her anything. No one waited for her approval. She tried again, her voice tighter now, carrying less authority and more urgency. You cannot just override a residential grid like this. There are procedures. There are approvals. The technician finally looked at her fully, calm, unbothered, the kind of expression that does not change because it does not need to. Ma'am, the procedures were followed, he said. You are standing inside them. The words landed clean, without emphasis, but they cut through the air in a way her earlier commands never had. She glanced down at the document again, her fingers tightening slightly along the edges, as if holding it harder would make it say something different. Across the street, a porch light flickered once, then shut off completely, followed by another, then another, like a quiet wave moving down the block. The change was subtle, but it was there. Power was not just restored. It was being redirected, controlled, prioritized. I watched her notice it, the moment it registered that the system she thought she had access to was no longer responding the way she expected. Her eyes lifted from the paper to the trucks, then to the lines above, then finally to my house, where the lights now burned steady and uninterrupted. Inside, the monitor gave a stronger, more confident beep, each interval consistent, each signal clear. I stepped closer to the bed again, adjusting a setting, confirming flow, checking connections with the same focus I had built this room with in the first place. Everything responded. Everything held. The room felt alive again, not just powered, but supported, like it had been reconnected to something deeper than a neighborhood grid. Outside, one of the technicians spoke quietly into a radio, his voice low and efficient, followed by a brief pause. then a simple acknowledgement. No panic, no confusion, just execution. Rebecca took a slow step back, then another, her heels clicking softly against the pavement, the sound small compared to the engines and the quiet authority surrounding them. She looked down at the paper one more time, then folded it, not neatly, not carefully, just enough to hold it together. The street around her, once something she managed down to the inch, now felt different, like it had shifted under her feet without asking. I rested my hand lightly on the bed rail again, the metal no longer cold, the room no longer silent, and for the first time since the lights went out, I did not feel like I was reacting. I felt like I was watching a system correct itself. The hum settled into a steady baseline, low and constant, like the house had been plugged into something far more stable than the grid it used to rely on. And for a moment, I just stood there, listening, not to the machines, but to the absence of chaos, the absence of that thin, fragile silence that had almost taken everything with it. I adjusted the flow rate one more time, watching the numbers lock into place, then glanced at my father's face, the tension easing from his features just enough to tell me the system was doing its job. Not perfect, not safe yet, but stable. That was all I needed right now. Stable. Outside, the trucks had shifted into full operation mode, cables secured, panels open, a controlled network built across asphalt and curb lines that had never been designed for anything like this. The faint smell of diesel mixed with night air drifted in again, grounding, mechanical, real. I stepped back toward the window. Slower now, my breathing finally matching the rhythm of the room. Rebecca was still there, but something about her stance had changed completely. The clipboard hung at her side now, forgotten, her shoulders slightly pulled in, like she was trying to make sense of a situation that no longer responded to her voice or her rules. One of the technicians approached her again, not rushed, not aggressive, just precise, holding another document this time. Thicker, official, the kind of paper that does not get printed for small problems. He extended it toward her, waiting. She hesitated before taking it, her fingers slower, less certain than before, like she already understood that whatever was written there was not something she could rewrite or reinterpret. You authorized a service interruption on a medically dependent residence, he said, calm and direct. Every word placed exactly where it needed to be. That triggers an automatic federal review. The air between them shifted, subtle but undeniable, like a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. She opened her mouth, ready to respond, but the words did not come out the same way this time. I was enforcing community standards, she said, but even she seemed to hear how small that sounded now, how disconnected it was from what was actually happening around her. The technician did not react, did not argue, just nodded once as if acknowledging that she had said something, then pointed lightly toward the street. Power is now being routed under emergency protocol. Your authorization no longer applies. Across the block, another set of lights dimmed, then went out entirely, leaving parts of the street in soft darkness while my house remained fully lit, every window glowing steady and strong. The contrast was impossible to ignore. This was not a blackout. This was control. I watched her turn slowly, taking in the change, the realization settling across her face piece by piece. The neighborhood she managed down to the inch was no longer hers to manage. Not tonight. Not anymore. Inside, the monitor gave another consistent tone, stronger now, the pattern holding without interruption. I rested my hand against the bed rail again, the metal warm from the room, and for the first time since this started, I allowed myself to think beyond the next minute. Because this was no longer just about restoring power. This was about what happens when someone mistakes authority for ownership and pushes just far enough to trigger something they cannot control. And outside, under the steady glow of lights she no longer controlled, Rebecca Holloway was beginning to understand exactly what that felt like. The system held steady, not just running but stabilizing, each second stretching a little longer than the last, giving the room space to breathe again. And I found myself listening differently now, not for failure, but for consistency, for that quiet, dependable rhythm that means everything is finally working the way it should. I checked the monitor again, watching the waveform settle into a clean, repeating pattern, each peak and drop exactly where it needed to be, the numbers holding within safe margins without fluctuation. My father's breathing followed it, no longer uneven, no longer struggling, just steady, supported, alive. The faint hum of the generator outside blended with the soft airflow from the concentrator, creating a background sound that felt almost engineered to reassure. I moved to the side table and adjusted a setting, then another, making small corrections that now actually responded, every input acknowledged, every output consistent. That was the difference. Control had returned, not partial, not fragile, but complete. Outside, the street had changed in ways that would not be obvious to anyone who did not know what to look for. The trucks remained in place, engines low, cables secured, but now there were additional lights mounted along the equipment, casting a cooler, sharper glow across the pavement, turning the front of my house into something that looked less like a residence and more like a controlled zone. 2 more individuals had arrived, stepping out of an unmarked SUV that had rolled in without drawing attention, their presence quiet but unmistakably deliberate. They moved with the same precision as the others, no wasted motion, no hesitation, their focus directed not at the equipment, but at Rebecca. She noticed them immediately. Her posture shifted again, shoulders tightening, chin lifting slightly, as if trying to reclaim some version of authority that no longer responded to her. One of the newcomers approached her, holding a slim folder, not offering it this time, just opening it in front of her, turning it slightly so she could see. "Rebecca Holloway," he said, his voice even, not loud, but carrying the kind of clarity that does not need volume. "You are listed as the authorizing party for a residential power interruption affecting medically dependent equipment." He paused just long enough for the weight of that sentence to settle, then continued. "This triggers mandatory federal review under Emergency Infrastructure Protection Guidelines." The words did not come with anger or threat. They came with certainty. Rebecca's eyes moved across the page, slower than before, her lips pressing together as if forming a response she had not yet decided to speak. "I was within my rights," she said finally, but the confidence was thinner now, stretched, no longer supported by anything around her. The man did not argue. He simply turned a page. "That determination is not made at the HOA level," he replied. "It is made at the system level." I watched from the window, my reflection faint against the glass, the room behind me glowing steady and strong, every machine working in quiet alignment. This was the part most people never see. Not the failure, not the panic, the correction. The moment when a system recognizes a breach and begins to respond, layer by layer, until control is restored in a way that cannot be overridden by paperwork or preference. Another technician spoke into his radio, confirming load balance, confirming priority routing, his voice calm, efficient, each word part of a process that had already been set in motion long before tonight. Rebecca took a small step back, then another, her gaze moving from the folder to the trucks to my house, trying to find something that still belonged to her control. But there was nothing left. Inside, I rested my hand on the bed rail again, feeling the warmth, the stability, the quiet strength of a system doing exactly what it was designed to do. And for the first time since this started, I was not thinking about what could go wrong. I was watching what happens when everything finally goes right. The street had gone quiet in a way that did not belong to any normal night. Not the peaceful kind people pay for when they move into neighborhoods like this, but the kind of quiet that follows when something shifts and everyone feels it without fully understanding why. Curtains moved slightly across the houses down the block, silhouettes pausing behind glass, porch lights flickering on and off as people tried to make sense of what they were seeing. 3 industrial generator trucks parked in perfect alignment, cables running like arteries across pavement, and a section of their street no longer behaving the way it used to. I watched it all through the reflection of the room behind me, the glow of stable monitors overlaying the outside scene like 2 different systems occupying the same space. My father's breathing stayed consistent, each cycle supported, each second earned back from what had almost been taken. I adjusted the blanket slightly at his side, a small motion, grounding, something human in the middle of all this controlled precision. Outside, Rebecca stood between 2 worlds now, one she used to command, and one she could not even name. She looked down the street again, noticing the pattern more clearly this time, how certain houses had gone dark while others remained untouched, how the distribution no longer followed property lines or HOA maps, but something else entirely. Priority routing, load balancing, system override. The kind of logic that does not care about aesthetics or bylaws, only outcomes. One of the men from the SUV spoke again, his tone unchanged, steady as before. "You will be contacted for a formal statement," he said, closing the folder with a soft, final motion. "Until then, do not attempt any further interference with utility services." It was not a warning. It was a boundary. Rebecca nodded once, but it was automatic, not agreement. Just the body responding before the mind caught up. She looked smaller now, not physically, but in the way presence works, like the space around her had expanded while her influence had not. The clipboard in her hand fell out of place, like a prop from a different story. A neighbor across the street stepped out onto their driveway, glancing toward the trucks, then toward Rebecca, then back again, trying to connect pieces that no longer fit together. The smell of fresh-cut grass still lingered faintly from earlier that evening, mixing strangely with diesel and cool air, suburban normal meeting something far beyond it. I rested my hand against the window frame, feeling the faint vibration from the generators, steady, reliable, nothing like the fragile silence from before. This was engineered certainty. This was what redundancy looks like when it actually matters. Another technician checked a panel, nodded to his partner, then stepped back, satisfied, their work moving from urgent to maintained, from crisis to control. Rebecca finally took a step away from the center of it all, then another, retreating not because she was told to, but because there was nowhere left for her to stand that still meant anything. Her eyes lifted once more toward my house, toward the light that had not flickered since it came back, toward a system she could not influence, could not access, could not shut down. Inside, the monitor continued its steady rhythm, the quiet proof that everything outside had translated into exactly what it needed to become in here. I exhaled slowly, the tension leaving in layers, not all at once, but enough to think clearly again. Because this was never just about turning the power back on. This was about what happens when someone reaches past their limits and touches a system that was never designed to answer to them. And out there, under the steady hum of machines she could not control, Rebecca Holloway was standing in the aftermath of that mistake. The rhythm in the room had settled into something dependable now, each sound layered with intention, the monitor marking time in steady intervals, the oxygen system moving air with quiet precision, the faint vibration of the external power source grounding everything in a way the old grid never could. I stood beside the bed for a moment longer, watching my father's chest rise and fall, slower now, controlled, the strain gone from his expression as if the room itself had taken over the burden he had been carrying. I adjusted the line one more time, a small correction, almost unnecessary, but habit does not disappear just because the crisis passes. It sharpens. It stays. Outside, the street continued to transform, not dramatically, not with noise or spectacle, but with quiet authority. Additional equipment had been brought out from the trucks, compact control units placed near the curb, cables secured with deliberate care, each connection checked twice, then left untouched, because nothing here was temporary in the way most people understand temporary. This was controlled permanence, a system holding until something higher decided otherwise. The cool light from the equipment cast long shadows across the pavement, stretching past the boundaries Rebecca once treated like borders. She had moved farther back now, closer to the sidewalk in front of her own house, the distance not just physical, but symbolic, like she had been pushed out of a space she used to define. I watched her glance toward her front porch, where her own lights flickered once, then dimmed, then went completely still, not off, not fully on, just reduced, limited, redirected. It was subtle, but it was enough. Enough to feel. Enough to understand that whatever system was now in control did not prioritize her comfort. It prioritized function. One of the technicians spoke quietly into his radio again, confirming sustained load, confirming medical priority status, his words short, efficient, each one part of a process that did not require explanation to anyone outside it. The man with the folder remained near Rebecca, not imposing, not aggressive, just present, like a marker placed at the edge of a line she was no longer allowed to cross. She tried once more, her voice softer now, almost careful. How long is this going to continue? The question hung in the air, different from the demands she had made earlier, stripped of command, shaped instead by uncertainty. The answer came just as evenly as everything else tonight. As long as required to ensure continuity of life support systems. No emotion, no negotiation, just a condition. I turned slightly, letting the glow from the monitor reflect across the room, every surface now lit with stable, unwavering light. The shadows that had crept in earlier were gone, replaced by clarity, by visibility, by control that did not depend on permission. I walked to the small table near the wall and picked up the folder I had left there earlier, the one with diagrams, permits, approvals, every layer of documentation that had built this room into something more than a bedroom. I flipped it open, not to check anything, but to feel the weight of it, the structure behind what had just happened. Because none of this was random. None of this was improvised. This was what happens when systems are built with the assumption that someone, somewhere, will eventually try to override them without understanding the consequences. Outside, the engines continued their low, steady hum, the sound no longer intrusive, just part of the environment now, like it had always been there. Rebecca stood in that sound, surrounded by it, no longer directing anything, no longer deciding anything, just existing within a framework she could not alter. And inside, as the monitor marked another perfect cycle and the room held steady without interruption, I realized something that had not been clear before. She had never actually controlled the power. She had only been allowed to think she did, right up until the moment it mattered. The night did not rush back to normal. It unfolded slowly, like a system easing out of emergency mode one controlled step at a time, and I could feel that transition in the room as clearly as I could hear it, the machines maintaining their steady rhythm without fluctuation, the air moving evenly, the light holding firm without a single flicker. I stood beside the bed and watched my father for a long moment, longer than necessary, just to confirm what the numbers were already telling me, that he was stable, that the line between crisis and recovery had been crossed and held. His breathing had settled into something natural again, no longer assisted by urgency, just supported by precision, and that difference mattered more than anything else that had happened outside. I adjusted the blanket at his shoulder and rested my hand there briefly, grounding myself in something real, something human, before turning back toward the window one last time. Outside, the trucks were still in place, engines running at a lower, quieter level now, no longer pushing, just maintaining, their presence no longer an interruption but a condition. The technicians moved with less urgency, their work shifting into monitoring, into verification, into the kind of quiet oversight that only happens when everything is already working. One of them disconnected a secondary line, coiling it carefully, while another checked a panel and logged something into a handheld device. Nothing rushed, nothing wasted. This was what control looked like when it was real. Rebecca stood near the edge of the sidewalk, no longer at the center of anything, her posture still, her gaze fixed somewhere between the trucks and my house, like she was trying to reconcile two versions of reality that no longer matched. The man with the folder had stepped away now, his role complete, leaving behind a space that did not need to be filled with words anymore. She did not speak again. She did not need to. The outcome had already been decided by something far beyond her reach. Across the street, lights began to return gradually, not all at once, but in measured intervals, houses coming back online as the system recalibrated, restoring balance without compromising the priority it had established. The pattern was deliberate, controlled, undeniable. I watched as her porch light came back fully, steady and bright, but it did not restore anything she had lost. It only made it visible. Inside, the monitor marked another perfect cycle, then another, each one a quiet confirmation that the system had done exactly what it was designed to do. I took a slow breath, the kind that fills your lungs completely, the kind you only notice after you have gone too long without it, and let it out just as slowly. The room felt different now, not just safe, but defended, like it had been connected to something that would not fail under pressure, something that did not depend on permission or preference. Outside, one of the technicians gave a final nod, a subtle signal, and the engines dropped another level, still active, still ready, but no longer on edge. Rebecca turned away at last, walking back toward her house with measured steps, her heels quiet against the pavement, her silhouette smaller than it had been at the start of the night. She did not look back. She did not need to. Everything she needed to understand had already happened. I rested my hand on the bed rail again, feeling the warmth, the stability, the quiet certainty of a system that had proven itself when it mattered most. And as the steady hum continued and the room held firm without a single interruption, one thought settled clearly, without urgency, without doubt. Power does not belong to the person who flips the switch. It belongs to the system that decides whether that switch matters at all.